and welcome to Exploring the Long-Term Ramifications of the SolarWinds attack, an HMG Strategy Digital Roundtable. I'm Tom Hoffman at HMG Strategy, and I'll be your MC for today's event. Our featured speakers today are Ritesh Agrawal, CEO and founder of Air Gap Networks, Nikhil Gupta, co-founder and CEO of Armor Code, Richard Sierson, co-founder and president of SolarWinds, Cliff Triplett, executive director at Kearney, and our moderator, Hunter Muller, president and CEO of HMG Strategy. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom.
So in today's event, we'll share the following. We'll discuss valuable perspectives on the specific risks to sensitive corporate and personal data that are inherent in the SolarWinds breach. We'll share rich insights on the long-term impacts to third-party risk and supply chain vulnerabilities. We'll also share advice for CISOs and security leaders on the next steps they should be taking. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Hunter to get us started. Hunter?
Great job, Tom. And by the way, Tom Hoffman, Tom and I have been collaborating together for probably now 30 years. He's been an HMG partner for probably 7 or 8, right, Tom? And I can almost remember like it was yesterday, picking up the phone and calling a young reporter for IDG's Computer World and CIO magazine and saying, Tom Hoffman, I think tech leaders need to be better in the C-suite, the line of business, and the boardroom, and they need to be better business leaders. And Tom said, really? Okay, this is about 30 years ago. That might be a hook. That might be a storyline. And we've been collaborating, right, Tom, for 30 years.
Absolutely.
True story. You can't make that up, folks. Hey, it's great to be with you all here. And just Hunter Muller, founder and CEO of HMG Strategy, the largest independent tech network of tech leaders, CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, CDOs, C-1s across the world, offer global media model, do over 1 million impressions monthly, probably several million monthly from our newsletter and other social media postings, including our recognition program. We have an incredible panel here today, folks. Really excited for the next hour to explore the whole SolarWinds breach, where we are today, what happened, what's still going on, and potentially how to protect yourself in the future here. Without any really further delay, I think I want to kind of go around the horn with brief introductions to set the stage. And let's start with my good friend, Cliff Triplett down in the Houston area. Cliff's a global executive in our industry, some 30 or 40 years into it, been a global CIO several times over, works for one of the top strategy management consulting firms in the world, Kearney. Cliff, great to see you. And boy, yesterday's Houston Summit was amazing.
Thanks, Hunter, and thanks for having me at this event as well. I don't know how much more I'm going to do for introduction. I lead the cybersecurity practice and risk management for Kearney. We're a billion-plus global consult for major corporations and governments on their strategies, risk assessment, investment priorities, and the such. I've been working quite a bit globally right now, from the Middle East, Asia, Europe, United States, working with governments in each of those locations, as well as major corporations and critical infrastructure. And so that's the kind of perspective I'll bring today to the call.
Great. Thanks, Cliff. Next up, we have Richard Sierson. Richard's the co-founder and president of Soluble. Rich, you have an amazing venture going on right now. Congratulations on your success, and really looking forward to the next hour.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So yes, Richard Sierson, co-founder of Soluble. Prior to Soluble, I was the CISO Lending Club, CISO Twilio, CISO GE Healthcare, and sundry others. Along the way, I wrote a book called How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk. And the only reason I mentioned that is because it's near and dear to this topic in terms of managing what's really a critical global risk. The book's become the main curriculum for the Department of Defense CISO program, curriculum at Harvard, MIT, Brown, Berkeley, and others. And so I'm excited to be here to share both my CISO experience and some of that experience as well. Thank you.
Excellent, Rich. More to come here in a minute. Next up, we have Ritesh Agrawal. Ritesh is the CEO of Air Gap Networks. Ritesh, great to see you, my friend.
Great to see you, Hunter, as well. And thanks, everybody, for joining the call. This is going to be an exciting call ahead. A quick introduction. My name is Ritesh Agrawal. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Air Gap Networks, a company started about 2 years ago, addressing some of the fundamental flaws that have not been fixed so far by the industry, which is of lateral propagation. And we'll discuss more how Air Gap provides protection against the lateral propagation of threat, which clearly is hot topic today, given SolarWinds exploited that kind of exploit in order to gain access to enterprise crown jewels.
And Ritesh, a little bit more about your background.
I started the company about 2 years ago, very excited about where AirGap is going. Prior to AirGap, I was running Juniper Networks security business portfolio, roughly about $400 million in revenue across data center and service provider business. And that's where I figured there are some fundamental flaws that can be fixed very seamlessly for the enterprises.
Excellent. And your whole space really is ransomware, right?
We are in the business of protecting against ransomware propagation inside the organization so that enterprises don't become part of the headlines that usually we see today.
And that's a huge, huge issue. Great. Glad you're here. And lastly, Nikhil Gupta. Nikhil is my good friend. He's the CEO and founder of Armor Code. Nikhil, it's always good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, good to see you as well, Hunter. And I'm so glad to be here on the panel. My name is Nikhil Gupta, co-founder and CEO of Armor Code Inc. We simplify software security, which is the crux of the SolarWinds issue. Basically, the problem originated when the build process was modified and bad code was injected in that. And how often people have been looking at securing the software. I started my career at Bell Labs like 20 plus years ago, and there we used to have one release a year. Now, fast forward 20 years, we have one release a day or several times a release a day. And in that particular case, there are two key important things which you need to do. One is have the visibility in your software development lifecycle. And second thing is automation, because the bad guys are using AI and automation to attack you. And if you're not using that, you're not on the same level playing field here. So excited to be here. A quick background about the company. We are a COVID-born company. We are very proud to say that. We started in last July. We already have a product and several POCs going on, working on a commercial contract. We have been engaged with several Fortune 500 companies. So it's an interesting space to be in, and we hope we'll add a lot of value to the companies here.
Awesome. Great job. By the way, just a little side note, folks, if you're attending, please, if you want, turn your camera on. We'd love to make this interactive. We had a session with Stephen M.R. Covey last night with our unique CIO, CISO Alliance, some 55 executives, and we had 2 pages of people lit up. It was really pretty exciting, pretty amazing, and pretty awesome. If you're interested, there'll be more opportunity to engage with Stephen Covey and myself. He's a great strategic partner alliance of ours and has an amazing message. But back to why we're here today, SolarWinds. Cliff, set in context. You're kind of like the senior spokesman here of set in context. I know you really have a clear angle on strategy and why it's important for any enterprise to have a strategic point of view. And we'll put it in context, SolarWinds, how big it was, how big it is, and still the potential risk and implications of that are still unfolding here right now, even today.
Well, like I said, I'm working with a lot of major corporations and several governments. And right now, I don't know anyone who doesn't feel they're at risk or have directly been impacted. And those who don't know they're directly impacted probably are the less mature who don't know if they're impacted by anything right now. Okay, so I think everyone has to assume they're either directly or indirectly impacted by this. And what makes it even worse is the connected nature of almost every major enterprise. They all are connected to third parties and have generally let them into their perimeter through whether even it's a VPN. But the problem is, as you guys probably all recognize, most of our major breaches have been infiltrated through a breach of perhaps a third party. And so everyone is concerned about that. And one of the things I've also been working on greatly with the Department of Defense and others is this concept of zero trust. And I think this has really pushed that, because I think one of the big problems we had with this particular incident with SolarWinds is people said, hey, SolarWinds got to be good to go. I just bring it down, load it up and run with it because it's from a trusted source. And I think today's world says there's no longer a trusted source. Everybody has to be looked at with suspicion. And so right now, like I think to your point, Hunter, this is absolutely global. It's at every major corporation, and the only people who aren't concerned about it probably are those who don't have a full grasp on the full suite of threats that face their companies.
Hey, Cliff, any numbers that are floating out there that you're aware of on any of the reports in terms of the total loss or risk here in exposure?
I haven't seen numbers on that, but the number I want to give you that I think is not one that we typically collect, how much energy is going in the investigation and remediation. This is about the biggest one I've seen of that nature. Okay. I don't know if we all know exactly what was lost. People are very apprehensive about communicating that. But I would tell you for at least a week or two, almost everybody in cyber and IT operations was focused on this and basically rebuilding almost their entire environments almost from scratch. I've never seen something of this magnitude of work and commitment and engagement of almost the whole IT shop for weeks on end.
Thanks, Cliff. Over to you, Rich. Rich, when you think about the supply chain, really, that's what is really the crux of this whole issue. And you're formerly a CISO and now a co-founder of a really an amazing company at Soluble. What are your thoughts regarding the supply chain? What's the next step? What should people be doing now and in the future?
By the way, in terms of being a past CISO, if you're a CISO and you start a new company, you will likely still be a CISO. And so my title actually is CISO. I'm still CISOing, can't escape it, which with pleasure. I just want to say one thing real quick about the, SolarWinds. So from a US government perspective, this might be clear. They're considering it espionage. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so what we know is that it's more of an espionage activity. And so, what is or what has or hasn't been stolen is unclear. And so I think it's critically important. It's not necessarily warfare, it's espionage. We do it too. So in one sense, fair play. So in terms of numbers as well, so 18,000 companies in theory impacted, but it was very targeted underneath the hood, particularly for the impacting the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and various other groups. So I think that's critically important to consider the breadth and depth of it. And when it comes to supply chain, particularly when it comes to digital modern supply chain, I think that's another thing that's really important. That's something that really, I think all of us, all the vendors here partake in, and certainly so does Soluble. In particular, the modern digital supply chain is really continuous integration, continuous deployment, right? Modern software development. Modern software development is what, 99% open source, right? We probably all are aware of that. In fact, I'd argue most software this day in the enterprise, even if it's not modern cloud native, has a majority of open source components in it, right? And so what do we need to consider there? GitHub Optiverse, the report in 2020 said that 17% of commits have purposeful malicious code in them, right? So, you think about this, repo poisoning, right? We're looking at not just SolarWinds, we have 18,000 instances out there, right, in the world. Let's look at open source software. Let's look at, and by the way, everything's open source. So when everything's purple, there's no purple, everything's open source. So we actually have this context where we have to be hyper vigilant about our particular roles in the supply chain. Our link in that chain, our job as a CISO is to secure that link, because I'm developing software, my company is developing software, I'm Salesforce.com, I'm IBM, I'm Microsoft, or I'm one of any many tens of thousands of smaller companies. My role as a CISO in the supply chain is to make sure that link, my role in that chain, that I'm not passing on risk downstream. So how do I do that? That means I have to ensure that any sort of open source software that I'm ingesting, any of the software that my teams are adding to that, right? Any of the infrastructure as code infrastructure that's being ingested in that and then pushed out in the cloud, all of that has to be secured at speed and on demand. So that's really, when I think about the modern digital supply chain and the CISO's role, job number one, or certainly your top 3 list on week 1 for a CISO, is to ensure that you understand what's there, what do you have coverage, you know, in depth, in breadth, and at speed. So just a little CISO thought on the topic more broadly.
Awesome stuff, Rich. Hey, a little bit about Soluble, who your backers were, and the whole genesis of your vision.
Sure. So I mentioned I was, CISO at Twilio when I was there as one of probably the first cloud native company to go public, and I learned a really great lesson there. And the lesson was that the security industry didn't have anything on the security spice rack that I could just deploy right into CI/CD that would be palatable and acceptable to modern developers. There just wasn't anything. Confronted that at Lending Club as well. Met my co-founder there. Went to Dell Technology Capital and said, hey, I see this problem. There's no easy way to secure continuous integration, continuous deployment, really our part of the supply chain. I want to solve this problem. They said, great, go solve it. And so that's what we do. And so, we're a seed stage company. We have customers signed on. We're moving forward and moving fast. And this topic is just really near and dear to my heart, hence why I'm here talking about it.
Excellent stuff. And a little bit about your backers.
Oh, so I mentioned Dell Technology Capital is a main backer. I have a number of shiny angels that are part of that as well.
Congrats. Great job. Thanks, Rich. Next up, we have Ritesh. Ritesh, your point of view on the topic today, SolarWinds, and then a little bit about air gaps.
Absolutely. Look, SolarWinds proved one thing for sure, that nobody's safe. Even the most sophisticated organizations, including government and in some of the security companies, actually have come out and said they've been breached. That is very clear to all of us that nobody's safe out there from an attack like SolarWinds. The other thing I say is SolarWinds is just a tip of the iceberg. You are upgrading and updating software on a daily basis, whether it's a printer, whether it's a camera, or a CCleaner software. If you guys remember, about 6 or 7 years ago, everybody upgraded CCleaner, and turns out that it had a malware. And it bypassed all your protection mechanism because everybody thought this is a legitimate software, including the tools that are designed to protect against such malware to begin with. So this could happen to everybody. The chances are one or more of your devices already have SolarWinds on it. If not, it'll be there soon. You need to be able to ensure that there is no lateral propagation. So if you follow the history and how SolarWinds actually attack happened and how it impacted many organizations, first thing obviously is to get the image, downloaded image compromised. And I think my good friend Nikhil is going to talk a lot about how you can protect from that to begin with. But once that happens, one of your vendor actually had an image that compromised, and that is actually downloaded to your endpoint. That image is going to want to move laterally like SolarWinds did. And there is a fundamental flaw that I discovered at before starting AirGap, which was this notion of shared VLANs. How many of you have been around and have seen the notion of VLANs being there for more than 3 decades? VLANs were invented in '84 by Nortel and Cisco. The world was very different back then. The world is extremely agile and mobile these days. However, we continue to deploy that broadcast domain kind of technology even today as if nothing has changed. And that was the discovery for AirGap to say, we need to shut that down. Cliff mentioned Zero Trust. We are Zero Trust isolation platform that would ensure that there is no lateral propagation. The VLAN-based flaw that you have is just gone. You deploy AirGap, within minutes, you don't have the worry of lateral propagation within the same VLAN. So I'm sort of intertwining SolarWinds and AirGap together just to give you an idea of how what the problem is and how AirGap can potentially solve it for you. The issue is of lateral propagation. AirGap will ensure that there is no lateral propagation, and it'll do it in the most elegant and sophisticated way without having to install any agents or APIs or forklift upgrades for your existing infrastructure. And most importantly, the technology that AirGap leverages is extremely scalable, has been inspired by telcos. The inspiration came from what we carry every day with us, which is the cell phone. These cell phones are isolated in a bubble of their own. That's why one infected device cannot infect other device. Imagine if we could do the same technology or make the same technology available to you in your enterprise, where one infected endpoint cannot infect any other endpoint. We would be able to confine the threat into a single device and stop the propagation of threat inside your organization. Nobody pays ransom if one device is infected. Nobody demands ransom if one device is infected. So Before you become a headline news, deploy something that will isolate every device, and air gap can make that happen for you very, very easily.
Hey, Ritesh, what was the genesis of this, of your idea, and why wasn't anyone else addressing it? And talk to us a little bit about your engineering team.
Absolutely. And the genesis of this idea was I was running security business for my previous employer at Juniper. And it's during that time I realized that customers are investing millions of dollars in protecting themselves. And the end result is the same. I mean, you see security companies getting breached as well. And to me, it was baffling. I started looking into why that is the case. And then coincidentally, I was also trying to sell to telcos. And one little secret I'll tell you, telcos do not buy as much security as enterprises do to protect their network. And yet you've never heard about SolarWinds like attack on all the subscribers of AT&T or Deutsche Telekom or Vodafone or Rogers. And this was the sort of contrast in my brain. It's like on one side, you have telcos that are not buying a lot of security. They have subscribers that are extremely vulnerable, which is the Android operating system. On the other side, you have enterprises that are buying a lot of security. They have relatively sophisticated endpoints that are patched up and upgraded all the time, and yet they get infected all the time. And so that was the genesis or the challenge that I saw. And it turns out that the telcos solve this problem very, very simply, which is they isolate every device in its own network. You and I and all of us on this call, probably 15 of us, 20 of us, can communicate with each other on a cell phone. Let's say all of us are on AT&T. We can connect to each other using Slack, using WhatsApp, using FaceTime, using email, but we can never connect to each other on a transport level on the cell phone network. For example, I cannot telnet you, I cannot SSH to you, I cannot FTP to you, I cannot connect to you using Windows File Share. These are the vulnerable protocols. You don't need that anymore in the enterprise as well. But because of shared VLAN, we made it available. And so that was the sort of founding principle of air gap is we don't need this lateral protocol. We need to be able to stop it. And we need to be able to do it in a way that you do not have to at all upgrade anything inside your organization. We sit hand in glove on top of your existing infrastructure and allow customers to migrate one VLAN at a time to air gap and protect their infrastructure. Zero trust, and I'll end with this. Cliff had mentioned zero trust. I am a strong proponent of zero trust, but I also want to say this to everybody. Zero trust is a journey. There is no magic wand that you will wave and say, I am zero trust starting Monday morning. It's not going to happen. You follow one step at a time and reduce the risk one step at a time. And in a 6 months or a year period, you would have achieved zero trust. There is no other way.
Excellent stuff, Ritesh. And a little bit about your company. Where are you in terms of your go-to-market and your funding?
Very good. We have been blessed to have very credible investors from the Valley. We have 3 investors at the moment, and more want to invest. Our customers want to invest in AirGap. Actually, they look at the technology, they think it makes total sense. We have now 3 customers who are very eager to invest in our next round. We are still seed-funded company. We had a couple of Series A offers that we politely requested that we wait. I think we have a great customer traction going on. We have half a dozen paying customers at the moment. We have more than a dozen customers that are at the final stages. Some of them are Fortune 50 companies. These are large banks. These are large oil and gas companies, for example. We are agnostic to what kind of device we protect. So IoTs or managed endpoints, whether they're on-prem or off-prem, we can protect all of them using air-gap technology. So that makes us available to all kinds of variety of organizations. And plus, our focus on ransomware makes it available to pretty much everybody. I tell this to everybody, ransomware does not discriminate. So we have customers that are across the board in terms of verticals. And we are going to raise the next round in Q2, late Q2 or early Q3.
Great presentation, Ritesh. Thanks so much. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Hey, next up we have Nikhil at Armor Code. Nikhil, great to see you, my friend.
Hey, thanks, Hunter, and thanks for my fellow panelists. I think so they have covered it all, like starting from Cliff stating that how big this breach is, and as Richard mentioned, that you need to have automation all the way. And again, I come back from a telecom background as well, so I totally concur with what Ritesh mentioned, that it's fascinating to see how telecoms don't get breached, whereas the rest of the enterprises do. So there are a few things which are very, very important here, right? So if you look at the SolarWinds breach, if you will, how it happened, it was very interesting. Now, of course, there is no one single thing which kind of causes a breach of this magnitude. There are kind of breaks at different points. The main point that we saw here was that the bad guys came in and they modified the software development life cycle. So they didn't change the software, if you will. During the build process, they actually went in, injected the code, and they added this bad malware, which could basically delete, which is very powerful, and deleted the file. And so when you have the finally binary, right, at that point, people don't expect any different behavior. And on top of that existing software, there were extra things that the software could do. So number one thing, which kind of, I believe here, is getting the visibility into this end-to-end process, right? So you have process when you're having releases several times a day, right from software clicking a button, pushing the software, going all the way to the production. It's not humanly possible to keep an eye on where exactly these kind of things can happen, right? So that is where having number one, the visibility of your secure software development life cycle, which people historically have been following software development lifecycle. And I believe it was Microsoft or somebody who coined this word called secure software development lifecycle. It's kind of a table stakes now. It's no longer an option to have a SDLC. It's very important to have a secure software development lifecycle. Now, how do you get visibility from the time the developer is writing code to it's getting pushed to the production? You need to have the visibility. Second thing is the automation and automation and automation. Like, I can't emphasize that it's not, again, humanly possible to go back and keep an eye. Yes, we can try to put a lot of checks and we can put safeguard the infrastructure, which are all important things. And again, I can't agree more than Ritesh that you need to have zero trust. But automation is number three. Two things. Number three things is the governance and compliance, right? So you need to have a method to the madness, where you need to put together a framework, right? So like, there is a reason why larger companies, and like, we are engaged with several Fortune 500 customers, they ask you to have SOC 2 compliance. And those compliance are actually required from the perspective you are having some governance principle that you are doing what you were claiming to do. But again, the challenge over there hit as you move and you develop the software much quicker. How do you have that compliance on a continuous basis? So again, getting the visibility into your software development lifecycle, doing a workflow and automation to ensure that the things are on the check, and getting a compliance. So these are the three key things, in my opinion, that we need to do as an organization to, again, be as secure as we can.
Hey, Nikhil, a little bit about Armor Code and your backing in where you are relative to your go-to-market.
Absolutely. So, Armor Code, we are very proud to say that we are a COVID-born company. We started last July. After selling my last company to Sophos a couple of years ago, I was kind of, taking a step back. But when COVID happened, as an entrepreneur, I felt responsibility that there has to be better ways to, solve the problem. And there's no better problem, or there's no better one than an entrepreneur to kind of take the problem head on. So that is where, we saw the problem in securing software development life cycle. So we started last July. We are a seed funded company backed by top-notch CRI Ventures as one of the investors. Then we have, Tau Ventures, we have Z5, and of course, HMG Ventures. So, we're very well funded, with very strong people backing us. As far as the go-to-market, the product is already out. We have, several large customers, engaging with the product. We're kind of getting the product live. We have like over a dozen engagements, and from the funding perspective, we are very well funded. Not looking for any funding anytime soon. Though again, like Ritesh, we have been overwhelmed with a lot of inbound interest, but we are very focused at this point, heads down, just getting more and more customers.
Excellent stuff. Thanks, Nikhil. Hey, Cliff, back over to you. You want to follow up? Did we lose Cliff?
No, I had to just step away for a second. My follow-up was, every one of these things is important. And I think we heard about, the open source. So the one thing I would think about on the open source is, you really got to go through that evaluation process and create your own private open source library that has gone through the full inspection. If you can't open the code and actually go through and inspect it, I don't think you can trust it. And if you deliberately go through that process as part of your software development process and you create your own private open source library, I think that'll reduce your risk a lot. I want to talk about Ritesh's air gap. I mean, it's really concepts of isolation. Isolation is your best security. I mean, if you can't touch it, it's the best. And isolation will help you with reconnaissance. I don't think necessarily this was a big reconnaissance play, it was a broad play, but it's going to help you with the delivery, installation, exploitation, and command and control. So the kill chain is another big one, but isolation is probably your best defense against everything. So I think what I heard from these three companies are different strategies. And I think the other comment I think Ritesh talked about is there is no one magic zero trust bullet, but I got to give credit. I think isolation is one of the best, and inspection is another very critical thing. So you need to really inspect, how does your network work? So there's air gap helps a lot. Your code libraries, how you develop it, what are you ingesting in your process, testing. And then the last thing is understanding the predicted behavior of your software and your systems. If you can't understand the behavior, then how do you detect the anomaly? Okay, so I think bringing what I think this whole panel has brought together in my mind is, like I said, bring it together. You got to take every piece that was discussed here, and that's how you approach and protecting your company. Back to you, Hunter.
Thanks, Cliff. Great stuff. Hey, Rich, you've actually published a book on measuring risk. In fact, your book is used by the DoD's CISO program. When you think about measuring risk, how can a CISO measure supply chain risk?
So, you know, I'll just go back to our particular focus at Soluble, because that's what I know and what I experienced as a CISO. So cloud native risk, right? We mentioned open source. So the modern supply chain for a modern company is their CI/CD. They're pumping out software and resources, cloud resources. I think the number one measurement for you as a CISO is just to be doing something. I can't underestimate how important it is that most CISOs, and listen, been there, done that, are only looking at risk post-deployment. You have to do that, by the way. If stuff escapes into the public domain, at the very least, you should be able to see that we've exposed yet another S3 bucket full of customer data. Let's get that really quick. But you want to shift all of that activity, right? You want to shift that left as soon as possible. So when I say shift left, let's just unpack what that means. Most enterprises are going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of repositories, right? The moment repositories stood up, the moment that a new code branch is stood up, the moment that someone said, oh gosh, guess what? We've been using Java, we've been using Go, we've been using, Node.js, but now we're going to start using X, Y, and Z. Are you on demand able to scan and assess and, to what Cliff said, know if there, are there any dependencies that are out of date? Do I have a new image that's from the Death Star signed by Darth Vader? Are you on top of that within a second? Not like, oh, I need to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks to get a vendor to cover this particular variant. You are on demand on top of it. So that means you're getting coverage at the speed of development of all the code, all the repos, in depth, in breadth, in real time. So I'd say the number one thing I'd be measuring is am I doing anything at all? If you're doing something, you're already heading in the right direction of winning. Then am I doing it really fast in depth and breadth? Can I say to my board, I have 100% coverage across all our repos in breadth, and I have 100% coverage on all the different types of software we're producing in depth. Just start there. By the way, there's hundreds of other metrics, but just start there. Am I doing anything at all right now? If you're waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks or months to go sort through vendors, I would encourage you, this would sound ironic, look at all the great open source solutions that typically have thousands and thousands of eyes on them, and start doing scanning now in your pipelines. But am I doing anything? Am I doing it in depth and breadth? And am I doing it at speed, at the speed of development? That's where I would start on metrics. I know it sounds really basic, but that's where we are today. Thanks.
Hey, Rich, for Soluble specifically, what industries do you play well with, and what size of enterprise?
If you're digitally transforming, which typically means you're using public cloud, which typically means you're doing continuous integration, continuous deployment. Even if you're just stepping into that, we play with you. So we have companies that are in the renewable energy space in the public domain. We're talking critical infrastructure. Typically, you'd think slow moving. We have companies that are growth companies that are completely cloud native as well. We play anywhere in between. If you are doing modern development at speed, then you would typically use Soluble. And all the metrics I just talked about, coverage at speed, at depth and breadth, that's us. We do that. We make it very easy to get complete coverage across all your code bases, all your repos in real time, so that you don't have to think about that anymore. You as a CISO can walk into the boardroom, whatever, and say, 100% done.
Excellent. Thanks, Rich. Great stuff.
Sure.
Over to Ritesh, it's been said buying new products isn't really the solution. So what does that mean for air gap? And why do we still need air gap?
You're right. Often enough, what we've seen, Hunter, is new products mean incremental upgrades. And frankly speaking, additional layer of security on top of perimeter security is not going to buy you a lot of return. So I'm not surprised that a lot of CISOs would consider buying new product is probably not the best thing to do in order to continue to provide additional layers of protection. If you look at the details of any product and realize, especially from AirGap's point of view, we're fundamentally solving a different problem. It is not an incremental improvement or so-called, no disrespect to AI, but so-called AI layer on top of something just to call it a new product. AirGap is allowing you to protect against lateral propagation. And we're very unique in that sense. We are leveraging what is a technology that is well known to all of us, which is the telco technology, and overlaying it on top of your infrastructure without having to make any changes. This is almost too good to be true. And I welcome you to sit down with me and give me just 15 minutes, no more than 15 minutes. And if you did not think that this was an amazing way to solve a problem, I would be shocked. I mean, I'm very sure that you will find it very, very promising, as I have seen after talking to hundreds of customers. Everyone said this is the best thing that I've seen. So if you understand the technology and say this is solving a problem at a foundational level, our investors told us that this is a first principle solution. The reason they love this product, they love the technology, is because it's a first principle solution. Many of us engineers, that's like music to our ears. You want to go after technology that's a first principle solution, because once you change something at a fundamental level, so many things change. So many things they become better for you. So there are fundamental flaws. We have lived with those flaws for 30 plus years. Let's challenge it. Let's look at this from AirGap's point of view. Deploy it in one VLAN. You have not much to lose. Figure out one VLAN or create a new VLAN. That's what our first customer did. They said, look, we love this technology, but there is no way I'm going to bet the farm on AirGap. It's a young company. We are the first customer. This was 18 months ago. And they created a VLAN for their IT organization. They put AirGap. They've been growing ever since. They've been really following the mantra of zero trust and systematically adding one VLAN at a time. And they are almost at a stage where 100% of the organization is going to be zero trust. So yeah, it's very important to understand what the technology crux is before you make a decision one way or another.
Love it. Thanks so much. Hey, Nikhil, over to you. When you think of SSDLC, what's the most important thing?
So, as I mentioned earlier, you need to have a secure software development lifecycle. To Cliff's point, yes, everything is kind of, or 80 to 90% is open source. And to Rich's point that, you need to have that visibility. And how do you put it all together and build it into a software development lifecycle? Because there are several aspects to it. You have a software development, you deploy it into the staging server, then it goes to production, and then again go back to the development. Now, where there are several points. So if you take a step back, there are various places where the bad actors can come in and inject right from the very get-go of the open source. So when you are injecting your open source, guess what? It's just inbuilt, or apart from that, into your deployment process, or in your build process, or in your production process. So that is where you need to secure and have a good visibility of your software development lifecycle, and that's why you need to have a secure software development lifecycle. Now, multiplying it to the factors like we are talking about supply chain attack, right? Pretty much all medium to large enterprises have one way or the other way suppliers which are there. And if you can get the visibility of this entire process, even for your suppliers, right? That is the mantra. That is the ultimate. Today, what happens is you go to your software suppliers and you ask them, are you compliant? Are you SOC 2 compliance? And you give them a bunch of questionnaires, right? But the thing which I want to challenge customers is like trust but verify. You should be able to go to your suppliers and tell them like, okay, you should be able to get a real-time visibility. The moment you make your suppliers accountable, then you will see the stark difference. Because today the mantra is, the way people work is, okay, there's a XYZ amount of penalty if a breach happens, but that's too late, right? That's too late, because then at that point, yes, you can cover part of your cost for operating cost for doing the reconnaissance and all those things. However, it's your brand, right, at the end of the day, and there is no cost to it, or it's very difficult to put a cost or dollars around there. So asking your suppliers to provide a real-time visibility of their secure software development cycle is kind of the way to go in future, like getting the visibility end to end, right, from your own software development lifecycle all the way to your vendors. That is where we come in, and that's where we recommend in having a better secure software development lifecycle.
Excellent. Thanks, Nikhil. Hey, Harold Knudsen. Harold's on the line out of Minneapolis. Harold, you got a question for the panel, right? You want to jump in, Harold?
Yeah, I do, Hunter. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Excellent. My question was just based on the zero trust principle. And as I said in the note there, I hate to be this ill-informed, but are you saying that if any company had scanned that SolarWinds packet coming in, instead of just accepting it as being from SolarWinds and therefore trusted, they could have prevented this exposure?
This is Cliff. I don't think you could. You could have perhaps contained the impact. Okay. If there's a couple of things I just want to pick up. Like Nicole's talking about the process of developing it. One of the big things we work on, and I work with defense a lot on ATOs, authority to operate certifications. And one of the key concepts there, what I think more private corporations should do, is clearly defining the boundaries of the system. Okay. Who am I authorized to talk about? And something the defense is also doing is a concept called DevSecOps. Okay. So as we develop, we're thinking about security and how we operate it. So as you're incorporating that into what like Armor Code's doing and understanding the boundary conditions and basically making whitelist boundary connections, then you can use a product like Ritesh's and build an appropriate air gap around those boundary conditions. Had you done something like that, then the horizontal propagation could have been significantly contained. So no, you wouldn't have stopped it, but you would have probably had much better understanding of what your risk exposure was. And I can almost guarantee it would have been much, much tighter. Now, depending on the level of isolation, you can't always do what Ritesh says. That's not how systems always work. They do need to collaborate. But if you took that concept into your DevSecOps development using something like Armor Code approach, and then you combine it with Ritesh, you could have dramatically reduced your risk.
Thanks, Cliff.
Could I jump in real quick on that, just super quick? Harold, I think one of the contexts, SolarWinds was out leveraged, right? According to Microsoft, there was roughly 1,000 developers on the bad guy side. According to the previous CISO of SolarWinds, this is a previous CISO, they had very lax controls. So again, if we go back to the idea of supply chain and your link in that chain, the issue is really around SolarWinds and how they controlled. The reality is that by the time that software got to you, your ability to be able to effectively control for that was somewhat limited. I mean, again, you had a small army on the bad guy side, and when you have people who are that leveraged against you, it becomes very, very difficult, right? But again, as a company that's producing your own software and someone who's going to be pushing value downstream to your customers, you absolutely, I think this is the point across the board, you absolutely have to be doing everything in your power to ensure that you're not passing on this debris that goes forward. But the SolarWinds one, listen, this is just a huge, massive outgunned situation. I mean, I just think it's important to understand the context of this.
Thank you, Rich. Hey, Todd, you're an HMG champion, a real thoughtful CISO out of the Valley with a cool company, Armis. Todd, you want to jump in?
Sure. So, I mean, I can send questionnaires out till I'm blue in the face. I've sent thousands out, right? And it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters to the point where, yeah, they have a good security posture. They passed the SOC 2. They did all this stuff. I mean, SolarWinds has a SOC 2, right? And they passed all our questionnaires, but this still happened, right? So, I mean, I think Cliff nailed it, where you need something like isolation, like Ritesh is bringing up. You need armor code. You need visibility into what your third-party software is doing, right? So if I have a piece of software I bought, I have it installed on a server. I don't know who does that anymore, but people still do. I need to know what it's doing on my network. I need to know what else it's talking to. I need to know what else it's affecting. And until I provide that internally to my company, I'm still going to be exposed because I can only ask so many questions and get so many answers and still trust the vendors. So that's how I look at it. So I just protect the heck out of any company I'm at and hope we're doing the right thing.
Excellent. Anyone else want to jump in? Michael?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a bunch of things. This has been one major hack lately. Then there's, of course, the exchange hack that has apparently hit a whole lot more companies and a very different vector, looks like very different kind of attack. But which are you seeing impacting more customers these days? Is it the exchange things, which seems to have hit more companies, but is a more limited kind of thing? Or is it the SolarWinds kind of attack? I mean, you obviously, as a CISO, need to worry about both of those things and all the other things too. But which one do you think is really become the more critical issue for most companies today?
Who wants to take it?
I'll give a perspective as Cliff. I think the level of effort to recover was much greater with SolarWinds. The potential compromise of information, because the way people use Exchange and the breadth of people would be Exchange, the recovery was a little simpler, but the impact assessment, the notifications and all that of what might have been compromised might have been greater with the Exchange. To me, I think the more challenging one was the SolarWinds, because you basically had to rebuild.
Thanks, Cliff.
I
Hey,
also,
Mel out of LA. Mel, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I've been listening to SolarWind pieces for a while now, and everybody here kind of said it right. And my question really is, how do you go back to that trust level with SolarWinds or any other vendor that you have, right? When you don't know whether or not they're running automated compliance, they're running, a DevSecOps process. How do you go back to them and put them, put their hands to the fire to say, prove it again?
Well, I'll just say this: when you have software that is intentionally break once, break everywhere, backdoor, but it's commercial, which is what SolarWinds is, I think I'd start there. Start looking at where have I essentially, purposely provided what would be a backdoor across my system. Start with that software. Ask, first of all, do I really want it there? And B, doing all the great things that have been mentioned by all the vendors here as well as it relates to that, right? So in the case of SolarWinds, you have something that is essentially a Bobby, break once, break everywhere. Wherever you have purposely put backdoors into your systems, those would be one of your top areas to focus on. Not all software is necessarily that is purposeful built like that, where it's configured to be like that, right? Obviously, there are backdoors that have been created maliciously. This is one where you purposely deployed a thing for managing systems across your network. You want to start with those sorts of systems that really have gratuitous access and can, if hijacked, can do nasty things, or if they're even used by Insiders who don't know what the heck they're doing can also do nasty things. So I'd say, that's one of the places to start in terms of your rank ordering risk management and taking steps. I would start there purposely.
So this is Cliff. I get asked this by major organizations. First thing I do is say, go identify your high valued assets, your most critical assets. Okay, because you can't do this for everything. And those highest critical ones, do the boundary, as I said before, find out what the boundary is, whatever you can do, air gap it. And then the next level, diverse architecture. Okay, don't be reliant on a single source. If it's that most critical asset, diverse architecture, the chances you're going to get, whacked on by SolarWinds at exactly the same time, you're going to get hit by some competitive product is unlikely. So yeah, maybe I lost this one, but I can still recover. And then if you use some kind of watchdog concept for even the next level up of protection is comparing results. That's what you got to do. But it starts with assessing what are your high valued assets, because you can't do what I said on all your assets. But
Right.
if you're a major corporation, maybe you have 5 of them. And those 5, and that's what you go to the board and say, look, I think these 5 are really essential to our business. We lose these, we take down our business. I'm going to do extraordinary things on these 5, not the whole place, these 5. Then it becomes reasonable and affordable and defensible.
Yeah, I brand that as the crown jewels, protecting the crown jewels. And the other question that I have, which is related to both of these comments, is when you've got, let's say you identify the 2 to 5, right? And you've got your SOARs and SIAMs, everybody's going through scrubbing, and, everybody talks about behavioral analysis, and, and how do you reduce the noise so you can find that 1 or 2, bits of outliers that, ping once a month or every 3 months to be able to get to say, well, that's not normal.
So to me, this really comes to whitelisting and getting into where you move into layer 7 application layer firewalls, where you say the outlier is just not even allowed. Okay, right. I mean, you make up the rules. Okay, right. And on the crown jewels, that's exactly what you should have. I mean, if your crown jewel should never be open to everybody. Okay, you should put some kind of gateway in between if you're going to have a crown jewel. And then I think you move 100% whitelist. That's your key. Then there aren't outliers.
I would add that to Cliff, to Cliff's comment, which is, why do you want to know the outliers? My fundamental belief is, first of all, avoid what is not necessary, and that's the whole idea of zero trust isolation. I don't care what is the intent of communication if it's not allowed. It may be good intent. Let's say you have 2 laptops want to communicate with each other using RDP as a protocol. If it is not allowed in the organization, I don't care if the developers have the right intent, because it's very difficult to understand the intent. That RDP communication may be malicious, may be good. And there may be some companies that would claim that I can identify the intent. That's when you see false positives or false negatives. They're both equally dangerous. False positives would require you to have a pair of eyes glued to the glass, and they're expensive pair of eyes. And false negative obviously creates SolarWinds kind of issues for you. So if it's not necessary, if it's not allowed, if it's not authorized, stop it. And then you have very limited that you have to monitor, maintain, and identify, and that's becomes a much easier job. That's the approach I think everybody should be taking.
Hey,
Let me just add one more thing.
We're gonna have to wrap it up here, Cliff. Final comment?
Yeah, the last thing is, I think what we just talked about, Ritesh and I, that's a general principle. I assume you have a CAB. The exception should go through your CAB as an emergency change control for that one unique instance, that outlier, if it's authorized. And
excellent.
That's why I put it back.
Great stuff. Hey guys, what an amazing session here. I think really, truly world-class thought leadership and insights. I want to thank you, Cliff, Rich, Ritesh, and Nikhil. Thank you very much for your active engagement in the HMG Accelerator here. We want to do one of these accelerator topics, ideas with new companies once a month. So, and then thanks, Rich, for putting your contact info in the chat. Cliff, I'd encourage you to do that, as well as Ritesh and Nikhil, in case somebody wants to reach out to you one-on-one directly. Tom, back over to you.
This has been great, Hunter. Thanks. And thank you to Ritesh, Nikhil, Cliff, and to Rich. Great insights today. This concludes exploring the long-term ramifications of the SolarWinds attack. an HMG Strategy Digital Roundtable. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you at an upcoming event.